Campaigners are urging councils in our cities to plant more trees to provide long-term heatwave relief. And the thermal imaging cameras found that surface temperatures were between 17 and 29 Celsius lower in the shade of street trees around the streets of Lambeth and Southwark in July. That research was conducted by the Create Streets Foundation. I'm delighted to be joined by Kitty Thompson, who undertook the readings. Kitty, you went on the street with your thermal imaging camera. You didn't do it today because perhaps it's a bit too warm, but what was it you found when you were out and about?
Yes, it was just over 2 weeks ago today. It said that we went out and it was 1 degree warmer than it is today. And we found that, to nobody's surprise, it's a lot cooler in the shade of a tree than it is walking and under the blistering London sun this summer. And I think that points to some really important points around what policymakers should be thinking about when it comes to cooling.
Now, your think tank, the Create Streets Foundation, have called trees the urban wonder drug. And we all like to look at trees. It's nice to live somewhere with trees. But when it comes to temperature, why is that?
Well, you're right. We do regard them as an urban wonder drug. And I think it's important that they are aesthetic and they are nice to have on the street, but they're also now a need to have on the street because they are serving an important public infrastructure role. And that means that we need to have more of them. And quite frankly, we don't have enough of them. And it differs wildly across the country how much canopy cover we have. Even in Lambeth and Southwark, which actually have, according to the Woodland Trust's Tree Equity Score, relatively high canopy cover, there's still long stretches of street where you are left exposed to the sun. And that's a pretty grueling walk if anybody wants to do it.
Well, you can actually go onto the Times website if you live in London, put in your postcode and it will show you how much urban cover you have. But Kitty, why is there this disparity? You know, people will be listening to this saying, just plant more trees. We know they're a good thing. People want to have them. Is there some kind of reason? Is it cost? Is it roots pulling up pavement? Or is it bad legislation?
I think we would squarely point at bad legislation, and in particular, we focus in our report, Too Hot to Handle, on the Highways Act 1980. And while that does create the provisions to plant for local authorities and indeed local residents, there are currently just too many barriers standing in the way. And indeed, when councils do allow people locally to plant trees, it comes with a license that you need to apply for, and that comes with a cost. For example, I was looking before I joined the call at Warwickshire County Council, where you have to pay £250 to apply for a license. And not only that, you need to ensure that you have £10 million worth of public liability insurance if you want to plant a tree on the road outside your house.
Do you think we need a kind of central government scheme on this? Because different local councils will take different views on this. We've just had a message in from James who said that on the Stansted Park estate in Hampshire, there's been a 7-year trial growing eucalyptus trees that have grown really well and they cope with the hot temperatures. So if you're like James and you've got some lovely eucalyptus trees, that's good. But not every council is going to see this as a priority. So is it something national government needs to do?
Successive national governments have introduced tree planting initiatives. I remember back in, I think it was 2019, the general election, it was a sort of arms race for how many trees can we plant, but you don't necessarily know with those targets where the trees are going to go. And if we want the trees to benefit people, they need to go in our urban and suburban environments. So I think there is certainly action that can be taken at national government, and that's to reform the Highways Act of 1980 to make sure that the barriers that are currently in the way for local authorities and for people to plant more trees are no longer there.
Now, I do remember a couple of years ago, there was quite a big row about trees in Sheffield when a contractor called Amy, I believe, who was looking after the street, took in charge of the trees. And they decided that some of the older trees in suburban Sheffield were too dangerous. They were pulling up the pavement and people woke up one morning to find their whole street had become empty. So it's not universally felt that trees are a good thing, and people will point out that particularly older trees do need more care and protection and money. So how are you going to cope with that as well as planting new ones?
So I think that it's hard to comment on a specific circumstance, but that trees do provide a public benefit. It is getting hotter outside, and therefore it points to the need to have some more trees. Obviously, you need to make sure that you've got the right tree planted in the right place, whether that be a eucalyptus tree like James is doing or another type of tree. And I think it's about that care and attention to detail. In fact, when members of the public acquire this license from their local authority to plant a tree outside the piece of road in front of their own home, they are actually responsible for it as well. So perhaps it's a case of making sure that the public are working with the local council. I think a lot of people view tree planting as a priority, and therefore the council might want to respond, and indeed national government, with the provision of more trees, but making sure it's done in a sensible way.
And finally, Kitty, the Create Streets Foundation, which you work for, has done a lot of stuff on urban planning and trying to urge councils to build beautiful and try and make places nice to live. When it comes to other things for dealing with climate change and these hotter temperatures beyond trees, what else do you believe needs to happen to ensure that, we are coping better?
Well, I would encourage all listeners to read our Stopping Britain Baking report, which was from even earlier this summer, which includes a series of asks looking at the building regulations and making sure that we're able to build in the traditional Georgian and Victorian terrace style, which lends itself well to natural cooling, but unfortunately we've lost along the way. And that would look specifically at the building regulations and Part O in particular.
Well, thank you very much. That was Kitty Thompson, who is Head of Policy and Campaigns at the Create Streets Foundation.